this all came about. Ray, I think facetiously asked me to speak one morning, and I said yes, and I think it surprised him, and so now he's stuck with it. But he asked me to speak on Galatians 2:20. I want to read it really quick. Do you have that back there? Put that up. Galatians 15 through 21. It goes, we ourselves are Jews by birth and not Gentile sinners. I love that, Gentile sinners. He just kind of pokes at them. I think that's a little funny. Yet we know that a person is not justified by works of the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ. So we also believe in Christ Jesus, in order to be justified by faith in Christ and not by works of the law, because by works of the law no one will be justified. But if, in our endeavor to be justified in Christ, we too were found to be sinners, is Christ then a servant of sin? Certainly not. For if I rebuild what I tore down, I prove myself to be a transgressor. For through the law, I died to the law so that I might live to God. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. In the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not nullify the grace of God, for if righteousness were through the law, then Christ died for no purpose. Paul is setting up a contrast, living by works, living by faith. We'll get into this a little bit more in a minute. Let me turn back to my other page. What I'm hoping to convey this morning is that it is faith in God alone that is the ultimate demonstration of the crucified life. It's not through works. But I do want to make a caveat. We tend to have an idea of what works are. We tend to think that works, good deeds, the things that we're supposed to do, are basically avoiding things like don't smoke, don't drink, don't cuss, don't chew, don't run around with girls that do. These are the kind of things that we think a Christian shouldn't do. I grew up in a church where beer was okay and wine was okay, but, heavy liquor, that stuff's bad. You shouldn't go there. A Christian wouldn't go to an R-rated movie. A good Christian wouldn't have long hair, even in my church. In fact, the school I went to, the college I went to, the girls went up one staircase and the boys went up another, which, by the way, wasn't such a bad idea. But I want to say that really living out, I saw a meme the other day that said, true faith is shown in obedience. I don't think that's true. Not the way we think about obedience, because we think of obedience as those things I just mentioned. We think of obedience as things that we don't do, things that we avoid, things that we put aside. In this case, Paul is talking about the law, keeping the Ten Commandments, keeping the law of Deuteronomy. But I think he's talking more, he's including just works, our salvation by works, trying to please God through the things that we do, and not just by pure faith. Some people would tell you that that's a work in itself, having faith. But it's about resting. Faith is about resting in God. So that's where I'm going to go this morning. That's where I want to get to. So if my ADHD brain wanders off all over the place, just know that this is where we're going. If we don't get there, then that's where I started, and that's where I wanted you to go. And I do want to point out something too. The guy up here in front that speaks to you, he's not really any different than anybody else. I'm up here, and thank you for letting me speak to you, but the real heroes or the real guys demonstrating their faith is not me. It's these guys up here that led the worship team. It's these folks back here in the booth, the people downstairs that cut up the bananas and put out the coffee. That is what true Christianity, that's the way true faith is demonstrated. Not through your haircut or movies you don't go to or anything like that. It's service. It's giving to others. in the name of, I mean, you can do those things too and be apart from God, but I'm just saying that those things reflect obedience that comes from, that is a result of your faith is what we're talking about, not obedience that is in place of your faith. I didn't have that in my notes. I just said that. Again, ADHD is going to run all over the place. So we're in the What Now series. That's why I'm talking. Ray asked me to talk about this. Now what? After the resurrection, how do you live your life as a Christian? And we're going to be talking about living the crucified life a little bit. I do need to go back and tell you something about one of the reasons I think Ray asked me to do this is because, as many of you know, 18 months ago I was in a significant car wreck with my son, and he was not scratched. Well, he did. He got a scratch on his hand, but I was kind of beat up in the wreck and was in the hospital for a few days, I think 2 weeks, and then recovering. It seems like the last 18 months, that's all I've done has been in physical therapy and recovery. I joked with my physical therapist the other day that I've had a longer and more intense relationship with my physical therapist than I've ever had with any woman I've ever known. And it took actually Ray asking me to do this that I started reflecting on the last 18 months. I did recognize that I hadn't been worried this whole time about money or the fact that I haven't been working, I'm a guy who's basically been in construction. I was a teacher for a while, but I was an adjunct. I didn't really make a lot of money. So I pretty much lived paycheck to paycheck. But for 18 months, I pretty much haven't worked. And yet God has provided. I have had everything and more than I've needed. It's not been a concern. And it's just looking back over the last 18 months that I realize what God has been doing. I mean, when I first got out of the hospital, I could barely get out of a chair. In fact, I slept in a chair. I had to sleep sitting up. I had 8 broken ribs and 2 broken vertebrae and a concussion. And as the year went on, we learned that there were other things wrong with me, including my shoulder was out of whack. I torn something in my shoulder. My hip had a chip in it. And so it's just things that I had to get taken care of. So just as I was starting to get well from the ribs and the concussion and all that, I had to have surgery on my shoulder and on my hip. And so found myself a year later still sitting in that chair. But God took care of me in all of this. And through you guys, through this, particularly the Bible study. The Bible study group was really intense in getting food to me and coming to visit and things. I really appreciate that. And that is part of what church is all about. That is part of what our community is all about, taking care of one another and looking after one another. The reason that I didn't worry about money was because I'd learned over time that God does provide. It isn't my income. It isn't my job. It isn't my family. It is the things that have bring me provision. Everything comes from God. I hope that isn't my truck beeping out there. The things everything that I have comes from God. And I give thanks to him every day for healthy boys and for, a roof over our head and food on our table. I mean, what more could you ask for, really? But I should have learned this a long time ago. And I got to tell you that in the summer of 2014, I walked through that door over there and shook hands with Jerry Redmond. And I was a hot mess. I was so messed up. You can ask Lou. I talked to him a bunch about it. I was going through a divorce. I had 2 young boys to take care of, and my wife and I split it, so it wasn't just me. But I had these 2 boys to take care of. I didn't really have any work, and that summer I had been adjuncting, so I didn't really have a job in the summer. I was picking up work, doing small carpentry jobs or fixing gutters or something, whatever I could find. And I was living in a trailer up in Hyde Park. It's funny, though, even through all that, because I'd turned to God and I started realizing that I couldn't do it, that God provided for me. We had enough. We didn't have a lot. There were a lot of times when the boys weren't with me that I didn't even turn the heat on. It was just cold. Had a down sleeping bag. I could deal with it. But when the boys were there, I had the heat on. But we made it. We got through all that. And so I learned through some of this stuff to trust in God. I should have learned that a long, long time ago. But slowly, from 2014 up until the wreck in December of 2023, I had learned to really, that everything that I had came from God. That there was nothing that I had that didn't come from him. And that's the only source, that I couldn't do it. And that's why when I went through this wreck and didn't have any money, I didn't worry about, I worried about a lot of things. And trust me, I complained a lot to God about sitting there in that chair, just sitting there. I couldn't even raise up for a little while. And then find myself back there again this next January. I was like, am I ever going to get out of this? But I walked the aisle over 50 years ago, so you would think that I would have learned some of these things along the way about trusting in God. But, we all do this. We all think that we have to, how do I put this? Let me just say, let me finish up this part of it. A friend of mine said what God has done in the past is both a promise and a pattern for what he will do in the future, but he's too creative to do the same thing twice. I want to repeat that. It's really good, and you should remember this. What God has done in the past is both a promise and a pattern for what he will do in the future, but he's too creative to do the exact same thing twice. So that's the bottom line of why I didn't go into, I didn't worry. I didn't sit and fret about money and everything. And I know it's probably awful to say this, but I didn't really think about it. It wasn't really until I started looking back at the last 18 months that I came to the realization, I wasn't worried. And I was walking with the Lord. It was a thing of, I'd learned to trust him, not myself. So let's move on. Galatians 2. Galatians 2 is basically a contrast between works of the law, keeping the law, and walking by faith. We go to that verse, I've been crucified with Christ. And often we think that, that means exactly what I was just talking about. That means that we have to give up things, that we have to crucify ourselves daily to get out there and deny ourselves and everything. But that's not what Paul's talking about here. Paul's talking about giving up doing those things in order to please God. I am crucified with Christ. He's saying, let's look at this one. Where am I? Oops. Went right past it. In verse 18, he says, "For if I rebuild what I tore down, I prove myself to be a transgressor, not Christ. For through the law, I died to the law so that I might live to God. Through the law, I died to the law that I might live to Christ." The next line is, "I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." That's the same. It's like a repeat. He's saying the same thing. I've died to the law. Basically, when Christ died on the cross, my life of living for the law died too. It was crucified with Christ. When Christ did that act, I no longer lived by the law. And it's the life I now live, I live by faith. I live by faith in God. Got to go back and forth. I can't actually have a Bible because I can't read them anymore. My glasses are not strong enough or something. So I have to have it on this, but the problem with this is I have to flip back and forth in this. So I just talked about a second ago that there's a list that we have. Don't smoke, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't buy things that say bad things about others. I think we all have lists. Everybody in here has a list of things that they do and they don't do, wouldn't do, couldn't do because I'm a Christian. But I want to say that the list isn't, these things that we don't do aren't to make us righteous or make us to justify us before God. They don't justify us before God. This list of things is a result of being justified by God. It is because you've been justified, because God has set us free, that we stop doing certain things. Sometimes you don't even know that you've stopped them. You just realize one day, hey, I'm not doing that. I am actually praying that God will give me some sort of, unction or something when I'm driving. It would be nice to not get angry at people that do dumb things. I keep reminding myself that I do stupid things too when I drive, but it would be nice not to get angry at people and get frustrated with people in front of you, or frustrated with the way, the Department of Transportation works, how they fix things. And I'm not saying that drinking or going to R-rated movies aren't sin. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that they're the result, that these things are a result of sin. These things are, we do certain things, we serve others because of faith. We stop doing certain things because it's a result of sin. We want to get away from that. We're going to get into faith in just a minute. I want to say something here. When I was dealing with this, I was looking up obedience because of that meme that I saw, that faith has shown itself in obedience. And I've talked to Lou and Ray about this several times, that the word for obedience in the New Testament typically is hupakao, and it means to listen up, hear, it says it's the way, it's what you do when you answer the door. Somebody knocks on the door, you hear it, and you go to the door. That's the way hupakao is used in traditional Greek. The same thing is with Shema, the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word, in fact, we even translate it, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. That's the Shema. The word Shema means listen up, hearken. It's not the exact same thing, would you say, as obedience? Although it is translated 150 times as obedience. And I don't want to get into all the Hebrew and Greek and all that stuff, because there's a whole world of art that goes into translation. But it is interesting that these words typically mean to listen up. So when you listen, and when you look in the dictionaries, they all say, like under hupakao, it says to listen, to hear, implied to obey. It's implied that you obey. Why is that? Because if you hear and really understand, you will do what you heard. And that's the thing that kind of pushed me away from this whole idea that we have to dress a certain way or look a certain way or breathe a certain way or act a certain way. And by the way, just for somebody gave me this illustration this week. They said, if you took a timeline of your life and put it out there like this, and from the time you became a Christian until now, and they just took a cross-section of your life, any place on that line, on my timeline, the chances are really high that you wouldn't see me being a Christian, acting like a Christian. The chances are greater that you will find me being the opposite. What? So I want to talk a little bit about faith. And I realize that I saw one thing that a guy said that hell is spoken of more in the New Testament than faith. And I looked it up, and it was way wrong. Faith is like 5 times or 10 times mentioned more. Just to use different words. The thing is, he's not using the word faith. He's using several different words for it. But faith is by far more important in the New Testament than hell. So if anybody tells you, you can't really preach the gospel without preaching hell, just I don't know, be nice to them. Yes, exactly, Matt. Grace. So what does it mean to be crucified with Christ? What does that actually mean? It obviously means not living by the law, not living by those rules that you've set for yourself, not relying on those things to make you righteous. Those things do not make you righteous. What makes you righteous is literally your position with Christ, your faith, your trust in him, putting everything that you have and trusting him to provide it for you. We sang a song, I don't think we sang it this morning, but we sing a song that talks about God as the great provider. He's the one that brings everything. In fact, if you look in Romans 1, he says that he talks about those people that, though they knew God through creation, they knew God through creation, they could see his works, and yet they did not honor him as God. They did not acknowledge him as God. Instead, they worshiped the creation. It says that they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. Why would you give thanks? Because he gives you everything, even the air you breathe. Everything that you need to live, to survive, everything comes from him. And so you give thanks to him for those things. So what does it mean to be, that's what it means to be crucified with Christ. To give thanks to him for everything. And I wanted to look, when I got to the Old Testament, I realized that the Old Testament is replete with examples of faith, or should I say, not faith. It's just full. It seems like there are few examples in the Bible where people lived their whole life completely faithful to God, completely in a life of trust to God. One of my favorite examples of faith is Hezekiah, who, if you remember the story of Sennacherib, Sennacherib had 180,000 men surrounding Jerusalem. Jerusalem had 50,000 souls. That means children, women, and I don't think they had any trained soldiers in there. They had 50,000 people. And Sennacherib was at the wall and said, give up, because everybody else has given up. We don't want to kill you, everybody here, but if you don't, we will wipe you out. And Hezekiah, on the word of Isaiah, said, no, we will trust in God. It's a great moment, right? A great moment. He showed great faith in God, and God delivered him, completely dismantled the 180,000. They all went home. Sennacherib went home and got killed by his son. It just completely demolished that army. And that was a great moment of faith, but later on, in a moment, I don't know whether it was pride or what, it doesn't really say, Hezekiah shows the opposing army, the leaders, he says, look at all this treasure we have. We have all this gold breastplates and armor. We have all this stuff. And isn't it beautiful? Look at what we've got. And they came and took it because they said, oh, that's great. We'll have it. And he couldn't do anything about it. So he had, and you see this throughout. Israel will show faith in God, and then they will just completely blow it. One of the great verses in Joshua is at the end of Joshua where Joshua says, will you do that? God says all you have to do is trust him. And they said, yes, we will do that. We will absolutely do that. That's what we've been doing for this whole time. And Joshua says, okay, then get rid of your idols. What were they doing with all these idols? They shouldn't have had the idols. But, and you see it all through the Old Testament with the people of Israel. They come to God. They're in trouble. They come to God because they can't do it themselves, and they recognize that they can't do it. So they come to God and say, God, please save us. And guess what he does? He saves them. Every time. Though they are faithless, God is faithful. Over and over and over again. And that's what the lesson that I want you to know. That's what we're trying to get out of Galatians 2. It's not that you beat your body and become crucified with Christ, but that you learn to have faith and trust in God. Now, Abraham An interesting guy. Genesis 22. What happens do you know what happens in Genesis 22? Genesis 22 is where Abraham and Isaac go up on the mountain. If you've got a Bible handy, let's go to Genesis 22. See if I can find it here. Look in verse 5. They're going up the mountain. They're going to go. God has said, go to the mountain and sacrifice Isaac. So they're going up there, and Abraham said to the young men that were with him as they traveled to the mount to where he was going to sacrifice Isaac. He said, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again. Abraham is another one of those mixed bags. Here's a guy who God said, come out of the Ur of Chaldees, come out of that place where of really pagan worship, come out of that. And he did. He left the Ur. He obeyed God and came out. He followed God out of the Ur of Chaldees. But when he came out, he told everybody that Sarah was his sister, which was half true, which also brings up a whole nother bag of worms about why was he married to his half-sister. He's not supposed to do that. But he told people that she was his sister. And he did this multiple times. We don't even know. Maybe 20 years he did this to people, and we only know about 2 instances where he was caught. But we can kind of assume that he did this a lot because Isaac did the same thing. Exactly the same thing. Jacob is known as the deceiver. Lying seems to run in the family. It's what do they say? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And it seems that was the habit of Abraham was to deceive, to kind of bend things around, to help him out. Not trust God. Notice that that's not trusting God. Telling the truth would have been trusting God. Bending the truth around to protect himself was the opposite. He's not showing faith. And also in verse 8, Abraham said, God will provide for himself a lamb. When Isaac asked him, he said, Dad, I see wood and I see fire, but I don't see a sacrifice. He says, well, God will provide. Abraham knew. God had shown him multiple times. We could go back and look at it. But God had shown him multiple times that his son from he and Sarah, was to be the promised one, not Ishmael. By the way he treated Hagar and Ishmael was awful. He sent them out into the desert to die, basically. This is not what a good father should do. But he was trying to work out his own blessing. God promised him a family. God promised him for generations to come that they would have, his offspring would be like the stars in the sky. So he was trying to work that out himself. He wasn't trusting God to do it. But he had finally learned that lesson. So he gets up here. God says, sacrifice Isaac. So he goes up there to sacrifice Isaac. And, So he goes up there to sacrifice Isaac. And he recognizes that God's going to do something different. This is not the end of Isaac. He is going to come back with us. That's what he tells him, isn't it? God will provide. He tells him in verse 5, and the boy will come back. We will be back. So his faith, he's learned to trust God. Sorry. Ooh, that was, cover this thing up next time. His faith has really grown. But I want to ask you a question. After this, he goes up there and he raises the knife. I don't do that very well. Sorry, my shoulder. He raises the knife in his left hand, and he is ready to plunge, and God stops him. What a sign of faith. As a father, I can't even imagine. It's beyond my comprehension that I couldn't do that. But he did, because he had confidence that whatever was going to happen, that Isaac was going to be okay. And I think that is a great demonstration of faith. So, God works all this in Abraham's, thank you, Joe. God works all this in Abraham's life. God fulfills his every need, teaches Abraham that he will provide. What does God do? What would you expect God to do with that? Wouldn't you expect that God would say, man, there's a man of faith. Let's use him. Let's go preach the gospel. Let's bring salvation to the world. That's it. He doesn't do anything else. That was the end of the story. The bottom of chapter 22 is the end of the story of Abraham. It goes to Isaac. The story turns to Isaac. My point is that faith that God worked in Abraham is the faith that he's wanting to work in you. And that's the end result. That's the goal. That's where he's trying to get us to that place where we trust him for everything. Excuse me, I don't want to drink this. I am certainly no example of what a Christian should be. But God has worked in me trust. I do trust in him because I know that I've learned that I can't do it. And not the easy way always. In fact, you rarely learn it the easy way. It is through hardship and difficulty. I think it's interesting that James says, count it all joy when you encounter various trials, knowing that the working of your faith, that God produces in you faith through these trials. I think some people learn it without it. And God bless them, because I wish I didn't have to go through all this to learn it. So I want to ask, ending up here, where do you put your faith? Is it in being a good person? Is it being nice to your neighbor? Being polite to other people in line? Being, not cursing out the drivers. By the way, if that gets me unrighteous, I am doomed. but if those things are the things that you rely on to make your case for righteousness, then you are missing it, because what God really wants, and we talk about it all the time, God wants a relationship. I'm saying God wants us to trust him. The whole idea of Sabbath is to put your weight on God, to rest on him, not to count on your crops growing, not to count on your truck running, not to count on the strength of your arms, but to recognize that your truck runs because God let it. Your arm is strong because God gave you the strength. All these things come from him, and that's what God is trying to work in your lives. I don't expect you to walk out of here going, I get it now. Unfortunately, what I'm telling you is probably going to, if you do get it, is probably going to cause you to have to lift some weights, to work out, to build up. It's not necessarily easy to trust God for everything. You have to, if you go back through my prayer journals, it's just almost a daily thing for me to remind myself that I can't do it, that only God can do it.